Hello and welcome to Tuesday Talks at Merryspring Nature Center for 2026. My name is John Fromer, the Program Director and your host. Today's Tuesday Talk is generously sponsored by Camden River House. Recordings are made possible by the Cascade Foundation. You can find today's talk and previous talks on our YouTube channel. Merryspring is open every day of the year from dawn to dusk free of charge. Find out more at merryspring.org. Today's program on ecology and conservation of Maine amphibians was presented by Kevin Ryan, Ph.D. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. I was excited to put this talk together for Merryspring. When John and I first spoke several months ago, we were coming up with what the talk was going to be, and we decided on all the amphibians of Maine. I've given a number of talks on Maine amphibians, but a lot of times, for good reason, it focuses on vernal pool amphibians. But for this talk, we're going to run the entire gamut. So we'll talk about all 18 species that we have here in the state, and fortunately we are able to do so. If we were a little bit further south in Florida or South America, forget about it. There's just going to be too many species to talk about. But today, luckily, we can talk a little bit about each one. And before we proceed, I just want to mention we're a smaller group, so if someone has a question, please just feel free to jump in and ask it. You don't need to wait for the end. You can interrupt me. I'll answer the question, and we can keep things moving. So I usually start with just a little bit of audience participation. Can anyone tell me how many frogs are in this slide? And I can say it's not a trick question.
I'm going to go with 2.
Lily, is he right?
Yeah, that's right.
I should mention my daughter here, Lily, is with me as well, herpetologist in training. And there are indeed two frogs on that slide. So how many species of frogs are on that slide? How many species of frogs are on that slide?
1.
One more.
2.
Two. How can you tell? Lil, can you tell me?
The patterns?
If you look at this frog on the bottom, the frog on the top is a bullfrog. They get big. The frog on the bottom is a green frog. And there's a number of ways that you can tell when you have the frog in hand. But what shows up well on this picture is what's called the dorsolateral fold or dorsolateral ridge. And on a green frog, it's going to go back. You can see it going on the back of the frog. Or on a bullfrog, it curves around what's called a tympanum. So the eardrum there, it curves around. It's a good way to tell them apart. There's size, but sometimes you can get a big green frog or a small bullfrog. So then with these two species, there's 2 frogs, how many sexes of frogs are on that slide? Lily?
There's 2, and you can tell because on the bottom one, if you look, the eardrum is about as big as the eye, and on the top one, it's a lot bigger. And if it's a lot bigger, that means it's a male, and if it's smaller, or the same size, that means it's a female.
So Lily's correct. If you couldn't hear that online, you look at the size of the tympanum relative to the eye. If it's about the same size as the eye, it's a female. If it's larger, it's a male. This works with bullfrogs and green frogs. Males also, you can see a little bit, will get that really nice yellow throat on both species there. So 2 common frogs, it's a way you can sort of tell them apart, because sometimes these guys get mixed up. So for this slide, how many species? 1 or 2?
2.
Anyone else?
Yeah, 2.
That's 1.
What?
That is 1 species. That is an eastern duke. That's a juvenile, and that's an adult, and we're going to get to that, a little bit more about that a little bit later in the slide. But those 2 belong to the same species. And how about these guys? Has anyone seen any of these salamanders before? If the one on top is probably the most common when people raise their hand on this slide. They've seen a spotted salamander that's got the black with yellow spots. That's the most common of the most salamanders we have. The salamander on the bottom is a blue spotted salamander. We have blue spotted salamanders in Maine as well. Not quite as common as the spotted salamander. And if you see the salamander in the center, which is called a marbled salamander in Maine, we want to know about it because as far as we know, they only come up into New Hampshire. They do not exist in Maine. Just a little fun fact, this photograph was taken in Connecticut, in eastern Connecticut, and the spotted and the blue spotted salamanders breed in vernal pools in the spring, but what separates the marbled out is they actually wait in the fall, and they breed in the fall and put their eggs in the bottom of the vernal pool when it's dry and wait for it to fill up. So in areas where they both exist, if you see salamander tadpoles in the early spring, you can know it's a marbled salamander. So I must mention that the Maine Amphibians and Reptiles, this book, is the definitive source. I might be biased, but would say it's the best book ever written on the subject of Maine herpetology. This just came, this is the newest edition now, came out in 2025. The edition before it was from 1998. So everything you can want to know about the extent of our knowledge on Maine amphibians is in here. The bullets on the slide show what the section that's discussed for each species. We don't have the time today to go through everything that's in this book. So what I'm trying to stick to is keep it to the basic life history and some cool facts about each species. There's going to be more information in here, and again, I don't lay claim to be the all-knowing of amphibians. There's stuff out there I don't know, and sometimes when giving talks, people point out facts that I had not known. So this book you can find it online, numerous places you can get it online. Definitely worth checking out. It's fantastic. It's edited by 5 authors, and there's a number of different people who wrote the chapters. They're all great. And the information for that book came not only from Maine biologists, but from the public as well. This is just a snapshot from a web page for the Maine Amphibian and Reptile Atlas Project. It's a citizen science, probably the longest running citizen science project in New England. It started in 1984. And this is for people to notify the state of their observations of various reptiles and amphibian species across the state. So this started back in the 80s as a mail-in program, mailing in the card that got filled out with photographs. And now, if you see the button down on the bottom of the page here, that will take you to a link where you can submit your observations, which you can upload photos, and there's a map where you can pinpoint where you find things. And then these records get scrutinized and entered into our system. So just to give you an example, the map on the left of the four-toed salamander is from the 1998 edition of the Maine Amphibian and Reptiles book, and the towns that are colored in are reports of the four-toed salamander. You can see with thousands of additional records, our knowledge of the distribution of four-toed salamanders in Maine has increased quite a bit. And if you look at this northern record up top, been scrutinized a little more. I wasn't part of the process for the four-toed, but for whatever reason, they decided that maybe that record wasn't as credible as originally thought and was removed. But it's interesting, it's great to see how much our knowledge has expanded in that time through the work of the department, but also through the work of knowledgeable citizens reporting what they're finding. So where are we going from here? I'd like to give an overview of the rest of the talk before we move forward, to show you all what we're getting into. Before we start talking about amphibians, we'll talk what is an amphibian. So I'm going to set forth a definition of what they are so we're all on the same page of what we're talking about. And then I broke it up, the talk, into 2 main parts. There's going to be amphibian ecology and amphibian conservation. I could have done this in a number of different ways. We could have done the species by family. We could have done it alphabetically. What I chose to do was break it up by habitat, by where you find these things. So that ended up being 8 groups broken up by habitat, 8 total groups, so 18 species broken up in 8 groups. And then for conservation, the second part of the talk is going to be how to conserve, what we can do to help keep these common species common and the rare ones from falling off the map. And for that, we broke it up into 6 groups. So this is just the calm before the storm of information. So an amphibian, frogs. Amphibians are frogs, toads, salamanders, newts, and caecilians. Amphibian means double life, essentially. Amphi is both sides, bios is life, because most amphibians, there's always exceptions to everything, will have an aquatic stage with gills, where they're breathing in the water, and a terrestrial adult stage where they have lungs. Again, there's exceptions, but for the most part, that's it. Did you have a question, Lo? So, I should mention before moving forward that frogs and salamanders both have tadpoles. Everybody knows that frogs have tadpoles, but just to put it out there, salamanders have tadpoles too. There's a few small differences. Frog tadpoles tend to will get their hind legs first. Salamander tadpoles get their front legs first, but salamander tadpoles also tend to have bushy gills. So they don't, it's pretty easy to tell them apart when you see them. And amphibians were among the first vertebrates to move from the water and move on land about 360 million years ago, so quite some time ago. And you always hear amphibians and reptiles grouped together. And the reason for that, some might assume, is that genetic closeness or something like that, but they're not. Amphibians are actually closer to fish, and reptiles are closer to mammals. Part of the reason that they tend to get grouped together when people study them is the habits and the habitats. You find them in similar places, so they go together well, like peanut butter and jelly. So moving into the bulk of the discussion here, we're going to sort of start. It's generalizations. I could have done different groupings, and again, there's exceptions to everything, but we're sort of moving from generalized to more specialized. So for our habitat generalists, we have the American toad and the green frog, which you saw earlier. American toad is unmistakable. It's our only species of toad in Maine. It's got that warty skin, which allows it to hold moisture in, so it can move across land pretty good distances. And the green frog, again, is similar looking to a bullfrog, but it's got that dorsolateral ridge that goes down the back. So for ecological traits, they both have pretty broad habitat tolerance. You can find them in a lot of different places. You can find toads just about anywhere. You'll find them hopping around fields, forests, meadows. They're there. Same thing with green frogs. They're sort of the Swiss Army knife of frogs. You can find them using streams. You can find them using permanent water bodies. You find them in vernal pools. They're everywhere. They get around a bit, and they have pretty good dispersal abilities. Flexible breeding sites as well, where toads tend to be on the more ephemeral end of wetlands and the green frogs more permanent. You can find green frogs breeding in small ponds. You find them attempting to breed in vernal pools or more permanent bodies of water. Whereas American toads will breed in anything from rut puddles in a pond to they like the edges of larger water bodies, and the shallows of larger water bodies will breed there too. So these two are often the first amphibians. If a kid is going out looking for things, chances are American toad or green frog might be one of the first amphibians you encounter. Green frogs, I grew up in the New York City metropolitan area in the suburbs, and there was a swale in my suburban backyard, and literally grew up. Green frogs were the only thing that could live there. So that's what I started catching way back in the day. So moving on to tree frogs, these are, as their name implies, species that are adapted for life above the ground, and they have adhesive toe pads for climbing. So everybody knows what many people have heard, spring peepers in the spring, that really loud peep is deafening. It is a harbinger of spring. And the same thing with gray tree frogs are very vocal as well, but they start to come in a little bit later in the season, and they tend to like wetlands that have shrubs in them, and they'll get up in the shrubs and call, and you'll hear that trill is a gray tree frog. So both have long distance calling. They can attract mates you can hear them from very far away. They can attract mates from quite far away, but adults actually spend much of the time on land. So unlike a green frog or a bullfrog, they're not sitting in the water most of the time. They're on land. You can find spring peepers hopping around near the forest floor. Some nice humid days. You can find gray tree frogs out at night hunting. A lot of people report them by their sliding glass doors by the window in the back of their house. But so they are on land for a significant period of time. Next up is meadow frogs. These guys get mixed up quite a bit. The pickerel frog and the leopard frog. People see pickerel frogs and immediately you understandably want to call it a leopard frog because it has those spots. But a good way to tell them apart is that pickerel frog has more squarish spots on its back, and they're sort of arranged more neatly in rows, whereas a leopard frog has more irregular spots. They're more like roundish blobs, and they're not arranged as neatly. This is a typical looking pickerel frog. They're beautiful. They usually have that nice like brown gray base color. Leopard frogs will be green, but a leopard frog can also be brown. So if you see a brown leopard frog, it can look very much like a pickerel frog. Pickerel frogs also get the nice yellow hind legs if you flip them over. It's really pretty yellow. So these guys use moist, grassy areas. They use field, floodplains, meadows, and not quite as common in the woods. Doesn't mean you won't find them in the woods, but they tend to be in more open canopy areas. So both these guys, life history highlights is both of them tend to breed in somewhat shallow water. But a pickerel frog has an interesting call, like if you hear it, sounds like a man making a funny sound. And you can be looking for them and never find the frog, as pickerel frogs will call from underwater. So that's a unique talent for them. And they're also supposedly toxic. So they say, from reading from when I was younger, that when kept in captivity, they could cause problems for other frogs due to their toxicity. It's nothing humans have to worry about. They call it a mild irritant. Don't go eating them, but no one does anyway. But as a morbid young man back in the day, I did put a pickerel frog in with some other frogs in a bucket, and everybody was fine. So I don't know, but they are known to be toxic. And for leopard frogs, what I wanted to mention was that you can typically find them using the same patch of soil. If you have a field or something that you know leopard frogs exist, you can often find the same individual using the same little patch of dirt. They'll sort of find a spot or move a little bit of grass out of their way so their belly can have contact with that wet soil to absorb moisture. So for a frog that looks very much like the other frogs who spend a lot of time in the water, leopard frogs are pretty brave, and they can be found considerable distances from water. Pond frogs, our two pond frogs in Maine are the bullfrog and the mink frog, and both of these guys are found more in permanent bodies of water. They're strongly tied to lakes and ponds, and in some cases very slow-moving water courses. Mink frogs rarely leave the water. They live in nice, densely vegetated ponds, things like that. That said, I have found them on the road in the fall. They will move around, but not as much as a bullfrog. Bullfrogs are known to use, despite being tied to permanent water, they will move around a lot to go to different wetlands to stuff their face with other amphibians and with other food sources. So you'll find them moving around a lot at night in summer when it's humid. For their life history highlights, mink frogs can emit a musky odor. Like, it's called mink because minks are mustelids and they have a musk that they give off. Well, the mink frog can give off a musky odor when you pick it up. That is, I haven't smelled it in a long time, but it's believed to be a predator deterrent. But what makes mink frogs particularly cool in the state of Maine too is that we're so far north that a lot of species reach their northern range limits here. For instance, northern black racers are endangered in the state of Maine. I know I'm talking reptiles there, but they're at their northern range limit, whereas further south they may be more common. Whereas mink frog is actually a more northern species reaching its southern range limit in Maine. So Maine and upstate New York represent the southernmost of their fringe. And the reason for that is they have these globular egg masses that they lay in bodies of water that need to be really cold and well oxygenated for the oxygen to get in to those embryos to be able to develop. So that is sort of what limits their distribution going further south. So pretty neat that being in Maine and having the southern range limit for a frog. And for bullfrogs, I need to mention, I would be remiss in not mentioning their appetite. They are known to be voracious predators. They will eat anything that they think they can fit in their mouth. As long as it doesn't matter if it's a bird, an insect, a snake, another frog, it does not matter. They will, if they think they can swallow it, they will try, they will attack it, they will go after it. So their salamander brethren, the aquatic salamanders that we have that are tied into more permanent water bodies, are the eastern newt shown here, and then I'm going to talk about the mud puppy as well, but I broke it up into a couple different slides here. So these guys, the adult stage of the eastern newt is strongly tied to permanent water, but the terrestrial stage is what we call a red F, this little orange guy here. These newts have what's called a tripartite life history. Only amphibian we have in Maine that does this. There's nothing other like it. So they start off as tadpoles in the water. They leave, hatch from an egg into a tadpole. They then leave the water and become a terrestrial juvenile. So that is a juvenile salamander that wanders for a couple years. It's not necessarily a set period. It could be different depending on where they are. Goes around as a juvenile, walking on the forest floor. People find these on rainy nights or rainy days in the summer. And then eventually go to a permanent body of water where they transform into adults. They retain those orange spots, but they become more greenish and then become full egg laying or fully capable of breeding adults. So last thing you mentioned about them as well, as you might imagine, the red Fs really stand out, so that orange is screaming their toxicity. It's there. No matter how toxic you are, there's always something that can eat you, but for a lot of things, avoid eating a red F because of that toxicity. So our next aquatic salamander is the mud puppy, and these guys are also strongly tied to permanent water, and they're fully aquatic. They don't leave the water. They're in there the whole time. And what's neat about them is they're neotenic or neotenic, depending if you're American or British. But they are adults. The adults retain larval characteristics. So the salamanders in the photo here are adults capable of reproduction, but they look like giant tadpoles. They have the external bushy gills, but that's how they stay as adults. There's other species of salamander. Another well-known species that can do that is an axolotl, is a type of mole salamander that can do that. And there's a few others as well that can become adults but maintain those larval characteristics and stay in the water. What's neat about these guys too is they're introduced. They are not native to Maine. So where Maine doesn't have as much of an issue due to our cold winters with introduced reptiles and amphibians. However, these guys are released in the Belgrade Lakes area, I think from 1939 to 43. There was a professor studying them. I need to find out more whether it was intentional or accidental, but they are in the Belgrade Lakes area, and it predates my time. The department did do some work trapping them and try to get a foothold in where they are and looking at what population sizes appear to be. But not much is actually known. There's about what their potential effects might be on the ecosystems that they inhabit, what they're eating, whether they have an effect on native fish communities and other things like that. Just requires more study. Stream salamanders. A lot of people have probably encountered these as well. They're associated with flowing water, clean, well-oxygenated streams. And if you go in a stream and you're flipping rocks and logs, this is what you will find. So in Maine, we have 3 species: the two-line salamander, dusky salamander, and the spring salamander. On this slide is the two-line and the dusky. You tell them the two-line tend to be yellowish. The color varies. They can get pretty dark in some cases, but they do have sort of 2 lines running down their back. And for a dusky salamander, a good way to tell them apart is their hind legs are more robust than their front legs, and they can actually jump. For a salamander with a body type like that, you wouldn't think they could, but they do a pretty good job of jumping out of one's hand. So two-line salamanders are the most abundant, they're the most widespread, and they're apparently the most tolerant to varying conditions. So when a stream watershed starts becoming impacted for whatever reason, and the stream becomes flashier and temperature regimes change or things are introduced to the stream, they tend to handle the most perturbations, where other species will tend to drop off. The duskies seem to be a little bit more sensitive to that. I should mention too, duskies, you'll find 2 lines in the stream. In the fall, they tend to go terrestrial. You'll find them on land as well. But duskies too, you'll find in some muddy areas, spring and seepage areas in the woods under rocks and logs. You'll find them there too. But the king of stream salamanders is the northern spring salamander, and these guys are strongly associated with really cold, well-shaded streams where rocky substrate is seemingly always present. So these guys have long larval periods. They spend their whole life in the water for the most part, so they can afford to have that long larval period. It looks very similar to an adult, but they'll have those bushy gills. And they are sort of the bullfrog of the salamander world, where spring salamanders are known to be voracious predators. My former boss had collected one in a plastic bag and had some dusky salamanders in there years ago. And the spring salamander ate the other salamanders while in captivity in the bag. Spring salamanders are pretty easy to tell. They get to be a pretty good size. They're big, they're pinkish purplish, the color can vary a bit, but they're tied to the water's got to be really clean, really cold. An example, this stream here is an example of what their habitat looks like. If you're walking around the woods and you find what looks like a beautiful stream that you want to take a picture of, that's got the nice, pretty clean rocks and crystal clear flowing water, that tends to be what you would find a spring salamander in. Moving from the stream to the forest, we've got 2 species here to talk about, the redback salamander and the four-toed salamander. These guys here are redback salamanders. They come in 2 color phases. There's the redback that has the red, self-explanatory, and what we call a leadback. They think that's somewhat tied into temperature. There's been a number of studies looking at it. There's certain ones are more prevalent in other areas, but regardless, the 2 are the same species. A four-toed salamander, when I showed that slide, how we know a lot better their distribution now, I think a lot of laypersons may write them off when you first see a four-toed as a redback. Because looking at the back, they do look somewhat similar. There's a number of ID features there, but really, if you flip over a four-toed salamander, they're going to have that pretty white belly with the black polka dots is a giveaway. Can't miss it. You see that? That's a four-toed salamander. And as its name implies, most salamanders have 5 toes in the back and 4 up front. The four-toed has 4 in the back and 4 in the front. That's what hemidactylium means, half foot. It's not, I'm fully missing a toe, but that's the name they chose to give it. So life history highlights for these guys is that, and I said earlier that most amphibians mostly have an aquatic larval phase and a terrestrial adult. Well, redback salamanders are higher up on the evolutionary ladder, and their eggs hatch directly into little juveniles. So they undergo the larval phase within the egg itself. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that redback salamanders, in some areas where they are prominent in good redback salamander habitat, the biomass for any given area, let's say you took a half an acre, the biomass of redback salamanders can make up more than any other vertebrate. So, weigh all the birds, weigh the deer, whatever. These things can make a significant portion of the biomass and the base of the food chain of the forest. So, as I said, these guys hatch directly into little juveniles, where the four-toeds still have they're in the same family, but they have a very short larval stage. And what four-toeds are known for is sphagnum moss. Is they'll get underneath, you want a wetland that has sphagnum moss in it, those sphagnum tussocks, hummocks, and they'll get underneath there, guard their eggs, and then the hatchfuls hatch out and drop into the water, and they do have a short larval period. Moving on to vernal pools, the last group I'll mention in the ecological section, we can give whole talks. A lot of what we talk about, and for good reason nowadays, is vernal pools. Since the 80s and 90s, vernal pool conservation has advanced quite a bit. But these are the species that we have here in Maine. The spotted salamander, some people call them yellow spotted salamander, but spotted salamander, the blue spotted salamander, and the wood frog. Spotted and blue spotted salamanders are pretty self-explanatory to tell them apart. A wood frog, it's that mask. They can range, this is a really pretty red one, but they can be gray, the color varies, but that mask, that raccoon mask, is a pretty good pretty big giveaway. And what makes them vernal pool amphibians is that they breed, for the most part, in temporary pools. They breed in wetlands that dry out, typically dry out by the end of the summer. But they spend the majority of their time in the forest surrounding these pools. And so we've since coined the term critical terrestrial habitat or life zone for that area surrounding pools that these species breed in. It's a misconception among some that amphibians must spend their whole time in the winter, but it's especially not the case, and they're found moving considerable distance from the wetlands that they breed in. So that surrounding forest is important. They're known to be explosive breeders, meaning that they all come out at the same time, all en masse in the spring, because they need to get their eggs laid and have the hatch out in the tadpoles and develop before the pools are going to dry out. So as such, the larvae develop rapidly. I should mention for the wood frog, they're very freeze tolerant. The only frog species in Alaska is the wood frog because they're so tolerant of freezing. And what happens is they, unlike a lot of the frogs that we have in Maine that will spend the winter underwater, bury themselves in mud somewhere where it doesn't freeze solid, these guys overwinter on land, and they concentrate, glucose, concentrate sugars in their cells in the important areas that makes ice form in the extracellular spaces. So it keeps all the important stuff from freezing, but then 60 to 70% of that frog can freeze solid and make a frogsicle. The heart literally stops beating and resumes in the spring. Unreal how they're able to do that, but they do freeze themselves on land. To further blow one's mind is for the spotted salamander, their egg masses are sometimes associated with an algae a green algae that you'll see on the mass. And there's sort of a symbiotic relationship there where the algae is providing oxygen to the egg mass, and then the egg mass and the tadpoles, developing tadpoles, the embryos, are providing nutrients to the algae. But what they further found is that sometimes that algae gets incorporated into the cells of the embryo. So it's the only known vertebrate that has photosynthesis going on within its cells. As far as I know, that's not present in the adults, but it is pretty wild to have a vertebrate animal that has a symbiotic relationship like that with an algae. And I can give we could give a whole other talk regarding blue-spotted salamanders. Most of what we refer to as a blue-spotted salamander in Maine is part of the unisexual complex. And there was a hybridization event that happened several million years ago that resulted in what we call a unisexual complex of these salamanders, that the populations consist almost entirely of females, and they use sperm from closely related species to either make clones of themselves, or if they incorporate the sperm into the offspring, to elevate their ploidy. So humans are diploid. Our sex cells are haploid, one set of chromosomes, sperm and egg. Humans are diploid. These can be up to pentaploid, I believe, with most of the unisexuals being triploid. It's really weird what's going on. So what Maine has is a mix of those unisexuals and diploid individuals, but again, that is a whole talk on its own. Moving on to the conservation section here, I wanted to put these two publications up. The one on the left is Best Development Practices Conserving Pool Breeding Amphibians in Residential and Commercial Developments in the Northeastern United States. This was written by my former boss and by my graduate school advisor. That's how I came to Maine, from meeting Dr. Aram Calhoun, who's one of the authors of that. This paper really got into motion, at least from my perspective, back in 2002, the circular concept and really getting vernal pool conservation in motion with conserving the areas, the surrounding forests around the pools that these things are breeding in. Maine going up to having that 250-foot critical terrestrial habitat surrounding significant pools that are deemed significant. But as we all know, logging, forestry is part of Maine's history, culture, and economy. And there is forestry habitat management guidelines as well for vernal pool management, because forestry guidelines are going to be different. When you're harvesting trees that are going to grow back, is different than developing areas. And there's guidelines specific to forestry in that document as well. So we've broken this one down into 6 groups. So we've combined the habitat generalists here and the tree frogs. Again, we have our gray tree frog, American toad, green frog, and spring peeper. Again, these guys have a pretty broad habitat tolerance. You can find them in a lot of places, but they're, and including, they'll use natural wetlands, but you'll also find them in human-created areas as well. But they're not indestructible. They are sensitive to human stressors, to water quality, things that damage water quality, road mortality, and you're going to see again in this section some repeated themes. So the primary threats to these guys are wetland loss and roads and salt. So just not having wetlands, not having the areas that they need to obtain moisture and to breed in. And roads and salt, amphibians don't cross roads well, and road salt can wreak havoc on larval development and on adults as well. And pathogens, ranavirus. I've seen ranavirus completely wipe out pools that are full of tadpoles one day, and then the next week they're completely dead. But also chytrid fungus, which was actually described at the University of Maine. Dr. Joyce Longcourt identified the chytrid fungus that is now affecting amphibians. Not to mention pollutants and pesticides, just all the junk that goes in. This is anecdotal, but the swale in my backyard that I grew up in, I no longer see green frogs back there. Could be just, there's just so much pressure going on in terms of inputs to that swale. So the management focus for these guys, they're common, but we want to keep the common stuff common. So protect your wetlands, try to keep wetlands intact, of course, and maintain water quality. And it's not hard to make an argument to maintain water quality. It's got benefits beyond amphibian conservation, just for human health and everything else as well. Moving to meadow frogs, again our pickerel frog and leopard frog. These guys depend on open grassy landscapes and clean water like all of them, but they're sensitive to habitat loss. If you don't have the open grassy areas, you're not going to have the frogs. For pickerel frogs, they're currently considered stable, but like I said, keep it that way. But they are vulnerable to habitat loss and pollution, and roads and road salt can affect the wetlands that they breed in. For leopard frogs is an interesting story. They were once really widespread and abundant. If you look at old herpetology books on amphibians in the Northeast, they're like, oh, needs no introduction, they're everywhere. Leopard frogs aren't everywhere anymore. Now they're a species of special concern. And the declines, we don't have one single smoking gun, but it's most likely due to multiple stressors, being anything from disease, chemical exposure, introduced predators, perhaps fish, to some of the wetlands that they breed in that could be eating eggs and or tadpoles, and getting caught up in agricultural machinery. It's just a big mix of things that had happened that make them far less common than they used to be. This was the leopard frog. I remember in college and lots of high school classes that dissect live frogs. That's what gets raised is Maine Amphibians, the northern leopard frog. So for their management focus, you want to conserve meadows and floodplains, maintain water quality, and again, reduce roads and the impacts of that stuff. You need clean meadows and fields that are intact landscapes. Pond frogs, bullfrogs, and mink frogs. So a bit of a interesting story with the bullfrog is they've actually been introduced and established outside of the range. So unlike so many amphibians, on the whole, bullfrogs numbers may be increasing due to being introduced outside of the native range, and we create permanent wetlands that they will use. If you dig a permanent pond, bullfrogs will use it. So when they do get introduced, you already heard me talk about the voracious appetite, which makes them interfere with native frogs, but then they're also known carriers of the chytrid fungus as well. Mink frog is a little bit, there's no known evidence that their populations are in decline right now, but they're understudied with limited distribution. Where mink frogs exist in the state is not necessarily where there's the highest development pressure in the areas where they live, but nevertheless it is good to keep tabs on things, because if mink frogs start dropping off the map, that's an indication of something. So the primary threats to these guys, no surprise there, is water quality decline and anything that would cause water to warm, being a mink frog, because as we know, they need that clean, cold, well-oxygenated water so that their embryos can develop. So again, management focus, keep the water clean and monitor the mink frog populations, and there are programs elsewhere to help control bullfrogs, but they're native here, so there's not bullfrog eradication programs in Maine. For our aquatic salamanders, being the newts and the mud puppy, the newts appear to be secure. They're pretty widespread in the state. They don't exist at super high densities, but they're there. And they could benefit from small impoundments, like humans like to dam streams, make little ponds that they will use. And the mud puppies are not native, so as far as being a conservation concern, it's the other end, worried about what effect mud puppies may be having on the natural system. Primary threats for the newts is habitat fragmentation. Recall that the juveniles wander on the land in search of greener pastures, new places to breed in. They don't cross roads well, so when those get chopped up, it can lead to population declines. And as I mentioned, more research is needed to examine the effect of mud puppies on local aquatic systems. So for stream salamanders, our two-line, dusky, and spring salamanders. As I mentioned, the two-line salamanders are the most tolerant of disturbance. Dusky salamanders, interesting story there. They appear secure statewide, but they have all but disappeared from some parts of Mount Desert Island. I think acid rain back in the 80s might have had an effect on that before, when we had, unfortunately, Maine is sort of America's tailpipe the way air moves, and before they got things under control with coal burning power plants back in the day, a lot of that precipitation was falling out and altering the pH of some of these streams, and the duskies seem to drop off the map. Spring salamanders too are having a hard time because they do not deal well with shifts in water quality and hydrologic regimes. I'll mention New Hampshire here. There was a study that was done from 1999 to 2018 that monitored 5 streams pretty closely, and they noted a 50% decline in spring salamanders there. Luckily, Maine is a stronghold for it. We're discovering more spring salamander locations, and we do have lots of clean, cold streams, and we want to keep it that way. It's great. If you go to a place like Connecticut, spring salamanders there only have a handful of localities, given naturally and because of how developed it is. But here, like with brook trout, we're sort of a stronghold for the spring salamander, and we make recommendations to keep it that way when development or forestry is happening, to keep those streams buffered and shaded. So again, maintain forest buffers along the streams. You want to protect the headwaters, seeps, and springs that feed those streams, where you're going to find your duskies. Keep those intact and try to maintain natural stream hydrology. So don't alter, take water away, or add it to it to make the streams more or less flashy. For forest salamanders, redbacks are ubiquitous and considered secure. There's been studies out there looking at forestry. They like some forestry practices more than others, but for the most part, redbacks, if you leave slash, if they've got leaf litter, if they've got sticks on the ground, that's what they use. Going back to the four-toed map I showed, they were once thought to be rare, but we have found more localities for them, due largely to the Maine Amphibian and Reptile Atlas projects. But they're still localized. They're not as common as redback salamanders because they're tied to those wetlands with the sphagnum moss. So you want to keep those wetlands nice and maintain that connection with the surrounding forest. And for vernal pools, again, this could be its own talk. They depend on both aquatic habitat and the surrounding forest, like some of the other species that we've mentioned. And they require landscape connectivity, not just between the pools and the forest, but between other pools to maintain that genetic connectedness between. So you want landscapes of intact pools linking up to one another to enable the flow of individuals and their genes. So primary threats has been development-associated habitat loss and fragmentation. You're cutting these things off, either losing the habitat outright or cutting it off from one another. And again, road mortality, which I will mention in the next slide. So to manage for these guys, protect pools and the surrounding critical terrestrial habitat. Maine is a leader in that regard. We have that 250-foot critical terrestrial habitat with pools that are deemed significant are afforded that protection when it has additional standards in that area. in an effort to maintain the pools and the amphibians and other wildlife using them. You also want to minimize road impacts to your breeding sites and like so many things, preserve the natural hydro period of the pools. If you have an intact vernal pool, you don't want to put your house gutters to it because you could have unintended consequences. So for those who want to help out, I know Greg LeClaire has been here before, and he went out and started his own nonprofit called Big Night, and he and his program coordinates volunteers throughout the state on Maine Big Night, one of the first warm, rainy nights when vernal pool and other amphibians really start moving in the spring. Is people volunteer to go out to certain road sites where there's known to be a lot of amphibians and literally help move these things across the road. He's collecting tons of data through this. That program is getting lots of species information, identifying hotspots, and just helping individual salamanders, not reducing that mortality of these things moving across the road. So it's a great program. You can find this website. Easy to go there if people are interested in joining up and helping out. He also found, just interesting, amphibian diversity in the state is pretty homogeneous, but he has the most diverse site that they have found has been in Orono. There's a site in Orono that has all but two amphibians in it, and it's missing, I think, spring salamanders and treefrogs, but everything else is there, which is pretty cool to be able to go to one area and find almost all of the amphibians that exist in the state. So with that, I appreciate your time. I can take any questions, and I included this picture because what it must look like before you get eaten by a bullfrog.
Wow, Kevin, that's excellent. If you do have questions, would you put them in the chat, please? And I have a question, which is, what do you suppose caused the tree frogs to decide to go up a tree?
That's a great evolutionary question. For however it worked out for those frogs, that selection pressures for each species made it so that the ones were exploited a niche by getting up into trees to do what they need to do, to stay safe and feed and do whatever. That's a good evolutionary biology question.
And there had to have been insects. They must have seen them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were probably predated on.
And still are.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. They hunt, but they are hunted quite a bit.
Right?
As well.
Okay, so I'm going to check the chat. Can you explain biomass a little better?
Biomass would be if you took a given area, if we took this room was forest, and biomass is all the living material, but you can separate out what biomass is. So if all the biomass, let's say like 75% of the biomass was comprised of one species of salamander, that tells you there's a heck of a lot of them. Is that a dictionary could probably give a more succinct definition, but biomass is essentially the mass of living things.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Are you using our iNaturalist posts to add to the Amphibian Atlas? And I guess I would want to know what iNaturalist account or how that would work. But are you using iNaturalist posts to add to the Amphibian Atlas?
I do not coordinate Maine Amphibian Reptile Atlas. I should also mention, I forgot to mention in the beginning that I'm relatively new. I've been at it for 6 months now. And we do have a herpetologist who does coordinate that. And I believe iNaturalist is involved in records. I mean, records always need to be scrutinized. If they need more information on that, feel free to email me and I can get an answer to that, because I can reach out to the person who does handle that sort of thing and see how iNaturalist records are treated.
Okay, and I'll add to that Merryspring does have an iNaturalist project. Hasn't been anything really done with it, but we set one up. Next question, what are the benefits of amphibians?
They are one of the best examples of, if you're looking at in existing intact ecology. I don't necessarily want to tie everything into having had a human benefit and go more to a romantic, that these things exist and therefore they should, and help me, and they contribute to, they're very important in the existing ecology of a given area. Is it gives you a perfect example, let's say with vernal pool amphibians, where sunlight hits the trees are making energy through their leaves, through photosynthesis. Those leaves then fall into the pool and start decaying and growing algae and other things. The tadpoles then eat that algae, eat those leaves, metamorphose into frogs, and hop out. So that's sunlight going directly from sun to plant to leaving as little frogs and putting all sorts of biomass and food into the local. All this has cascading effects, which would imagine would be significant with just the sheer amount of biomass that's being pumped out of these pools. That's all the amphibians that it's producing, and what those amphibians are feeding, and what those amphibians are feeding on. It's all linked there.
Excellent.
Was that
That's great.
I hope they're okay with that.
Let's see. What is the current status of the ranavirus and chytrid fungus in Maine?
Chytrid?
Chytrid.
They're both here, but I could research if they have a specific question, like what they mean by status. They both here. They are here, and they affect some species more than others. I think it seems to be. I'm not an expert on that, but they believe the chytrid fungus doesn't have an easy as a time in colder climates. That doesn't mean it's negligible, but I can find out more about that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. Part of the same question from above. I think maybe two-part. What is above and below amphibians in the food chain? And then.
Well, below is everything they eat.
Yeah.
Amphibians will eat other amphibians. They will eat. A bullfrog will eat anything. So a bullfrog could eat a snake, but then a snake that's large enough can then turn around and eat a bullfrog. I've almost so many times garter snakes eat toads. Everything eats. Owls will eat amphibians. Everything eats amphibians. So anything that eats them is quote unquote above.
What gets wood frogs' hearts restarted?
We're not sure.
Does it literally start beating when it thaws out, or is some kind of chemical process? Not sure.
Not sure. I'd have to. I'm not sure if the exact cause has been identified. I can dig up some papers.
So I don't see any other questions. Would you, Kevin, please repeat your email?
Oh, sure. It's kevin.ryan@maine.gov.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining us today. Please check our calendar for the next few weeks and workshops. And yes, it was a great presentation. And thank you. And we will see you all next week.
Thank you for joining this Tuesday talk. For more information, please visit Merryspring at www.merryspring.org and also